How you doing today?
I'm really good actually. I've gotten a lot of painting done. I'm feeling like God is in his heaven and all is right with the earth. Actually, that could just be the sherry that I'm sipping.
All right, so listeners, let us come clean. This is the same conversation with the same, what am I drinking? 20 ounces of white wine uh, from the last episode. But we had a little pause because we know you can't listen to our dulcet tones forever. And now we are going to attack some of the other parts of planting bulbs. And so we'll get more into the nitty gritty. And we still have, yay, Scott Beuerlein with us.
Hey,
He came back. He apologized profusely for some of the things he said in the last episode, and we thought grudgingly we'd keep him on. So this is Scott Beuerlein. He is the director of horticultural outreach at Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Gardens, or as they say, Cincinnati Botanical Gardens and Zoo.
Mm-hmm.
He is, I don't think actually there's probably ever been a director of outreach who has outreached more than you have, Scott.
Such long arms.
yeah.
Outreach all over the country.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I know. I'm going to try to do better this time. I really will.
Noted. We're watching.
All right, so we've designed up a storm in our last episode about what to do with these bulbs, but we didn't talk about which ones. Everybody knows about tulips and daffodils, but there are other things to behold. But by the way, just so you're tracking, there are approximately 5,000 different types of tulips that you could possibly shop for to fill your garden, and there are 30,000 registered types of daffodils. There are white ones, there are pink ones, there are yellow ones, there are orange ones, there are double ones, there are single ones. I think there are like 13 different ways to describe a daffodil, and that just boggles my mind. So we're not going to go there. Early, middle, late, super early, super late. If you're a beginning gardener, the world is your oyster. Don't do what I did in 1986 and buy a dozen, get a lot, right?
Right. Absolutely. Get a lot. And shall we take this into the things that you like about a certain bulb and the things that you don't like about a certain bulb, or things to think about when you're planting that certain bulb? Would that be more helpful?
Probably would. So basics, well, let's get the two out of the way. Scott, describe for our listeners what are the advantages and disadvantages of tulips.
Tulips, think of them as an annual for most people. Um, so all the other bulbs that I could think of, well, there's a handful of others that you treat like annuals, but tulips, that's the primary one. Not so much particular variety, although I guess that's important and to a certain degree. But I think the things to think about with you know, with bulbs in general when you're picking them out is, you know, three things twice, early, mid, or late bloom. And you probably want to just dabble in all of them, just extend your season. And then the size. With the minor bulbs, they're all small. That's easy. You don't have to worry about it. But with daffodils and tulips, it does matter more. And with daffodils in particular, because they're not annual, and you do expect them to come back every year, and they will forever. They're such reliable, good plants that you want to make them work in your landscape. And I'm thinking in particular right now about like the larger ones, big daffodils that take so long to die back, and they as they have their moment of glory, and then as the rest of the garden is coming into fruition in spring, they're collapsing. They're a sign, like that all is not so perfect in the universe. You could look at an ordinary garden without daffodils in the springtime and go, look at that. It's just a sign of youth and perfection. But if you've got a big old daffodil right in the middle there, it is dying the most ghastly of deaths. And everybody tells you, oh,
You
you
gotta
gotta wait.
wait.
You gotta wait.
Oh God, don't,
Cut back
these are
that
rules,
foliage.
regulations.
These are
Didn't you
rules.
write some funny, so Scott also
Maybe
writes,
just one
I
funny.
tried to.
Scott
I
also
don't know how successful I was.
one funny. Scott also writes for Garden Rant, and just in case you weren't tracking, Marianne and Scott write to each other on Garden Rant, which is the most fabulous gardening blog that there is. And there's a section of it called Dear Gardener where these two people spar all the time. So if you want to have some chuckles, go find that. But I don't know whether this was a letter to Marianne or just your own. What did you call that thing where you're waiting for the
I,
goddamn foliage to go away?
what I described it as like the worst B movie actor, silent actor doing this death scene that goes on so dramatically, on and on. And I've actually tried to do that in front of groups once, very successfully. The other times, not at all. I don't know what I did right that
The
other
audience
time.
may have been drinking.
Yeah, but with smaller daffodils, that doesn't seem to be the same problem. And you get a lot of charm out of those. You get one big daffodil versus five little ones is the same amount of color. Just that's something to think about. What you want, what fits in your landscape. If it's a giant landscape and it's a big field of grass and you're just putting them in, by all means, go for the big ones, because that won't matter. And the other thing I'll say too is the rules are the rules, but I've broken them year after year, and without seemingly any repercussion, they come back anyway. Maybe not as big as they would if you did side by side. I don't know. Bulbs are so resilient that I have no problem just breaking rules and seeing what happens.
One of the things I think that you have to look at in terms of that rule breaking or bending is, that's one thing when it's out in the lawn, when it's out in a wild space, but when you're dealing with beds, and a lot of foliage, forget about the ugliness factor. You also have to think about the smothering factor of that foliage on emerging
Mm.
perennials. And so if you've got perennials that are really sort of, I don't want to say fading flowers, but they're a little weaker to come up. They're not just this up thrusting, amazing sort of Amsonia huberti, which you cannot keep down. But there may be a phlox or something like that where they are covered by the foliage of some really floppy, say, a daffodil or an allium. Allium's a really bad one for big smothering foliage that takes up way too much room. You have to really think about that when you're putting them into your borders. And that's one of the reasons that I use smaller daffodils in my beds, like even the ubiquitous tete-a-tete.
I mean, it's a great one.
It's a great one, and it's very small. At first, when you first start planting it, you just have a few little bunches sitting around. It looks so pathetic in the cold. But once you've really built that up and you have a real show, it's pretty
Yeah.
cool. And then it dies back, and you're not really noticing it in those beds. The plants aren't affected by it. And then the other one that I use a lot is Talia in my beds, which is a late white, taller daffodil.
Love that one.
Absolutely
Mhm.
gorgeous. And it's so much later in the bulb season that it's a lot of stuff has already started to come up and through it. And, it's getting higher, getting bigger, those perennials you might be worried about. So that's one of the rules that, you know, do bend to try and figure out what works, but realize why it might not be working. It's just because you're smothering the hell out of your perennials.
And also the science of it, listeners, you're probably tracking that you've bought something that's packed full of photosynthesis, the breeder stuck into your bulb, so it flowers. Then you have this foliage, and that is the only food that's going to feed the bulb for your potential for next year. So if you get rid of that foliage, there is no chlorophyll, there is no photosynthesis, and you've weakened your bulb. But I've weakened my sense of like my garden looks pretty when I have to look at that stuff. So what to do? I mean, I've been known to sort of finger comb it in between some things. So it's like all going the same direction and I don't have to, it's not sprawling. So maybe it's still photosynthesizing. There are studies that show that once that leaf, so picture the leaf of a daffodil, and it's still green, but it's bent. So that means, what is it, the xylem or the phloem that's getting the juice back down to the bulb? I can never remember, but
I think it's the flow.
the phloem back down there. And so if it's bent at all, then maybe we're done here, right? Because that conduit is kind of bent and broken. Oh, here's one thing that you don't want to do is braid the the foliage.
You've got too much
No, if
time.
if you're gonna braid foliage, then go back inside the house and put plastic covers on your couches too. I mean, you might as well just go. It's a full, oh my gosh, OCD.
Yeah.
Every single time I see it, it takes me out of the feeling of a garden. It's like, oh, you care that much. You know what I mean? There's a
But
whole level
also,
of,
you don't know very much because you've broken the conduit and it doesn't do any good. You might as well have cut it. If you're going to braid it, Don't do that because you should be doing so many other things like volunteering at your local food bank. I don't know what.
Exactly. And it just draws attention to it.
Are there actually any studies, Leslie, that show that you've broken that? Because I know, like for instance, I've got a deer who just tried to take out one of my magnolias by removing the bark from most of it. But I know from experience that that back end that it didn't get to is going to do a
Are we
lot
talking
of
about
work
back
next
ends
year.
again?
Yeah, I have a problem.
Sorry.
Um, but it's the part that still retains some bark. I mean, there's going to be some damage to the tree, but the xylem, phloem, et cetera, is in that cambium layer is intact on that side. So I'm wondering on the bulb, on that bulb foliage, it's bent on one side, not so bent on the other. I wonder if there's any studies. I don't know if there are any studies to say braiding is bad. I mean, I find it offensive, but but then, I also find other things offensive, which Scott is always telling me I've just got to stick up my proverbial. So there you go.
But I think with monocots, the movement isn't restricted to the very outside, so it can go down through the whole the whole leaf. It may look broken, but still able to get nutrients down into the bulb. But I think we're just kind of like overthinking this a little bit because these plants are so efficient. You think about this lifespan of green they have, that's only a few weeks, really. And yet, not only do they always replenish their own bulb, but they're usually throwing off dozens of offsets and increasing in size. They're very good at what they do, and I don't think we need to worry too much about them performing.
But just don't waste your time. Don't do that. If something's sticking up and it's bugging you, just sort of say, "Oh, could you please hide under this perennial where you probably won't photosynthesize because you're in the shade, but I'm going to be happier." Just
I think by the time that foliage has started to fall down, you've got a much
Yeah.
better window there for removing it, or, just give it a little yank and see if it wants to come away. If it doesn't, okay, let it be. But I think that once it starts to flop, it's supposed to be when it yellows, but it's been my experience where I have it very visible in a place where I don't want it to be that visible, and I've taken it off. I've had no problems later.
so when you're listening to us, listener, it's going to be early December or whatever because podcasts are happily evergreen. Isn't that a great little pun there?
Wow,
Evergreen.
you are a
Thank
genius.
you.
That was perfect.
Yeah, I know. So here's what I wanted to say. If it is early December and you haven't planted your bulbs, you might want to think about that. But all is not lost. Do not think, oh, I'm a failure. They're going to sit in my garage. I've wasted my money. You can still do it. And you know what else you can do? You can get on some websites and see what's on sale because there might be some warehouses that are looking to clear out. So early December, depending on where you are, if you're in Maine, yeah, I don't know. With Colorado, you probably have snow on the ground. But we're still in the game, right, Scott?
Oh yeah, as long as the ground isn't frozen, put them in the ground. I've known people who just found some and put them in March. And you're not going to get that great flower display. They might not even make it. It's worth trying. More than likely they'll grow. You won't get the great flower display, but just wait a year and then they're back in the game again and should perform for you.
Brent Heath at Brent and Becky's told me many years ago that what you want to do is get that little bulb to start rooting. And once it starts that process of rooting in soil that's it's obviously not frozen but not too cold, it has it changes the sugars, et cetera, all these things I don't understand, but it allows itself to turn into antifreeze for the winter ahead. So your optimal thing to do is to be able to give a bulb that time to just get the beginning of that root formation going in the bulb. And sometimes if you're doing containers and it's really late, it's December and you still want to put tulip containers out, it might be a good idea to plant them up into pots and leave them in the garage for a little while or the basement or a spare room or something just to root, for a couple weeks and then get them outside because they have metabolically change so that they can handle that cold freeze. Many years ago, no, I guess it was about 3 years ago, I had a lot of bulbs that I needed to plant, and I did so. It was at the end of December, and I got them all in the ground. And 3 days later, we had that terrible drop that everybody experienced. What was that? That Christmas drop. Was it 2 years ago or 3 years
Oh,
ago?
yeah,
That
that
was two
was,
years ago. It was
22?
22.
Okay. So, yeah. And I
22.
did end up losing a lot of those bulbs that went in that were
oh,
the little guys, mostly the
Hmm.
little guys that were real close to the surface because it was extended. It was a 3 or 4 day
Yeah.
extended freeze. By the
hmm
end of that, my ground was solid. Those little bulbs, depending on the species, were a lot of them mush.
Now that you mentioned that, I remember frantically going out and drilling in a bunch of bulbs days before that because it was in the forecast.
yeah, it was forecast.
And I don't know the name of it. I need to go back and look, but there was a from Brent and Becky's a really nice daffodil that I got. Really good, healthy bulbs. Got them in, the ground as best I could. I probably went a little deeper than I usually do with those, knowing. But still, you know how it is. You're drilling one bulb hole at a time. Somehow the backfill just disappears. You only have enough to fill the hole halfway back again, and then you shove a bunch of sticks and leaves in there.
How does that happen?
And every one of those came up and they lived. But the funny thing is, they came up very late,
Oh,
extremely late. I had those daffodils in bloom in June, I think. It was such a surreal experience to see daffodils blooming alongside phlox or whatever was going on at the time. They've righted themselves since. They now, bloom when the daffodils should. But it was just a weird thing.
Yeah, that's an important
okay.
thing to remember for those of you who are very new to bulb planting and also have a very large Instagram account. Please don't tell us how these bloom in June because you put them in December. Because the reality is that they just need to get their feet underneath them and get back into the swing of things, and then they're going to go into a normal thing. But the later you plant a bulb, often the later you're going to see it coming up.
In that first year, and then they will get back on schedule. Should we talk for a minute on planting depth? Just what's the rule of thumb? Just 3 times the size of the bulb, right? So you're really only sad when you have those baseball-sized allium bulbs. You're like, oh God, I have a job in front of me.
Well, that's the rule. But again, I think there's exceptions. I know with the 100,000 tulips that we plant, a lot of them are planted by volunteers, and some of them are very elderly. They're cutting corners, and of course, all the teenagers are cutting corners, and so some of these things are barely covered up at all, and yet they come through fine. So there's a lot of room for
hmm
error there. Though obviously, the best you can do, the better. And some of the bulbs, and you're getting into some of the weird ones like erythronium, and they find their own depth. They will dig themselves deeper,
Very
Oh,
cool.
cool.
until where they need to be. You got to be careful with those because they'll keep digging and digging and digging and not flowering if you let them. So a lot of people will plant, will put a rock or something underneath them, which kind of stops their digging and makes them bloom, which is
Huh.
interesting.
But the little guys are so fun. And if you had an idea of planting near tree roots, it would make you very sad to put an allium bulb there. A little sad to make,
Yeah.
big fat set of tulips or something. But if you have some of these little guys, it's a, it's an inch or two, and there you go, and you're good to go.
Yeah, the little ephemerals, we keep saying the little guys, but we should actually say some names here. So we just
Go for it, you person who can remember them.
Right.
I do have 10 years on you too, so let's just be clear.
Yeah,
Um,
you do. Yeah, you do. Cheers, Scott.
Yeah, cheers.
anyway, I would say for the ephemeral, the little guys, my very, very favorite is Claytonia, which is a bulb. It actually is a little tiny bulb guy, Claytonia virginiana, which is, or virginica, I'm not sure which. Spring Beauty, does that sound right, Scott?
Yeah, Spring Beauty. Yeah.
Which will just carpet your lawn and is so gorgeous. Sort of beginning of April for me and 7A, 6B. Pink flower, pink anthers. so that if you see the bees on it, which you will, they've got pink in
Oh,
their little sacs on their back, and it's one of very few flowers
Mm.
that have pink pollen. It's very, very cool. It's a tiny little one. One of the coolest little bulbs that I love is Iris reticulata. And I don't know if either one of you, you're nodding, I don't know if you grow this, but
Hmm.
I started growing these because they were giving them away for $1 a pot at Walmart,
oh,
which I know it's a very odd thing, but you come across this end of season and it was the, hey, these are blooming and they're pretty. They finished blooming and they were $1 a pot. And there's probably 5 bulbs in there. So I thought, oh, what the heck? And I did a little research on them and thought I need to plant them in very, very well drained, on a slope if possible, pretty sandy soil. And I did that and I've had them going and I keep adding to them for the last 5 years. And from what I understand, Iris reticulata, it splits itself and you get a lot of foliage, but you stop getting flowers if it's not in decent conditions that it likes. Those are fabulous. I love them. They bloom February-ish, as end of February, and then about 18 inches of these long spiky foliage, and then they are done for the season.
what about muscari, the grape hyacinth?
I think it's a really good one. I mean, it's sort of common, so people kind of just like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really reliable plant, really good one. There are different varieties that you can buy if you want to mix it up a little bit. But a really it's sort of like one of those, I call them the Zebco 33s of the plant world. But it's the real everybody got when they were a kid and they went fishing. But because it was a good one. It was a good reel that
That was lost on both of us. We were just like, the what?
I
33?
know, and I knew it going in, and I couldn't stop.
Okay. Pretty sure I used a bamboo pole, but whatever.
I'm trying to think what would work in your world, and it's just not
You
No,
coming to
don't
me. But
understand my world.
just the workman-like plant.
I'm just trying to think of some makeup brand. It's like but wait, we don't wear makeup. No, that's not going to
Come
work.
on.
But and other ones I like Hyanodoxa. It's one that'll get real thick, and you can easily divide it within a couple of years.
What do they call that? It's
Glory
Glory
of
of the
Glory of the
Snow.
Snow.
Glory of the
That's right. Oh, and Pushkinia, which is very similar to Kynodoxa.
Oh, way to go!
The Russian snowdrop, they call that. Also white with the blue sort of veining in it.
I have never grown that one.
I grow that. I grow
No.
Kynodoxa. I would say Kynodoxa. I don't know.
Whatever. Yeah.
I mean, it's a CH, and so if you have an Italian blood, then you're going to say Kynodoxa.
Okay.
Hyanodoxa.
But I grow Blue Giant and I love that one. The Pushkinia, again, that was a Walmart find. There is nothing,
I need to go to your
I'll tell you what,
Walmart.
there is nothing better
I know, right?
than sort of hunting, bottom feeding the big boxes for things that it feels like you don't know what this is, right? You've just gotten like an end of wholesalers discount here, this will work, give it to the mass, and you're sort of, this is not what you think it is. I'll take that. Thank you. That there is nothing better than that. I love that.
What about crocuses? I love crocuses.
Love crocuses.
Ugh, I'm so
What? Gosh, you're having a fit here.
the
What's
What? The deer?
the
freaking
rabbits, the voles,
squirrels.
your husband? Who's eating?
I'm
Okay.
done. Between the squirrels and then the ones that actually come up, the deer come along and eat the tops off of. And I just wanted,
Oh.
Yeah.
I wanted crocus
Yeah.
meadow, crocus, and last year, and when I was doing that Why Winter Garden Challenge and I was bemoaning this, I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll throw seed and they can get started from seed, and maybe that will not alert the squirrels to their presence.
Hmm.
But I didn't do that. I never hunted out seed,
Mm.
and so I can't say if that works or not.
You can't say if that works or not yet. That is a very important word. Yet. We have the future in front of us. What about
Some of us do.
Okay. Okay. What about what do you call that? That's a checkerboard one, the Meleagris.
Oh, fritillary.
Yeah.
Oh.
Love those.
So they like moisture, I think. Don't they, Scott? A bit of moist
Yeah.
meadow type situation,
I think so.
except the Imperialis.
Yeah, and I've only just started dabbling with those. So I don't have experience, so I can't help you there. Kamasi is like that though.
Yes. Oh my gosh,
Hmm.
Camassia. If you are not growing Camassia or not trying Camassia yet, skip like 10 years of maybe I should try those and just freaking order some. They are so gorgeous.
And the photos never give them justice.
All right, so Scott, talk about Camasias because people might not know. Okay, so they're late season, they're tall, they're blue, more.
The tall, yeah, tall, skinny things. I think this is one where a bigger size grouping probably is better,
Hmm.
though they'll get there on their own. But just a very loose and open, naturalistic kind of plant. Probably what, maybe at least knee high, maybe more
Yeah,
like it,
getting between knee and hip.
with the skate. Yeah, up in there. And hyacinthoides.
Spanish squill, I think they call it. That's a bit of a thug. I love it though. I love it.
Yeah, you want to be careful with some of these where you put them. That one, yeah, it'll take off. Scylla too. You put that where it will be contained. But for that same reason, it's awesome for a lawn. You can just put it in the lawn and it just sparkles.
Just for information, because I know that if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not a hardliner in terms of natives because we're not. But the Camasia is native to the United States, and I think the one that you can most easily find if you're shopping online is native to the northwest of the United States.
Quamash, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there is one that is native to Missouri and even Virginia, Tennessee, like the middle. So if that floats your boat, you can get native bulbs, and that's not easy because most of them aren't.
That's correct. And your native deer can eat your native bulbs.
No, what native there we have are usually, yeah, they're native to the Rockies or the Pacific Northwest, and that very different conditions than what we can do on the eastern half of the country. The one exception, I guess, is the native trout lily, the erythronium.
Mm.
But that's a hard one to buy. It's a slow one to grow. I think what happened in my house. I think I planted that probably 20 years ago, maybe a seed. Just threw it in this one particular just shady part of my garden. Forgot all about it, and then for several years I got some leaves, nothing else. And then 2 years ago I finally got flowers. But that was one of those great experiences where you forget what you did and you kind of just wind up with this really pleasant, surprise out
I
there.
have hundreds of that Americanum. Not anything to do with me, just naturally occurring in my stream valley. And I would, I
Yeah.
honestly, I think there are hundreds because the foliage is beautiful, so you could see that. But I think I probably have maybe 7 or 8 blooms that I see.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, they run and run and run and run, which is obviously their preferred method of propagation. So they run and run. And I have had a friend who's told me, and he knows his stuff, that if you have them in a place where there's rocks or areas that they will come up against and they can't run, oftentimes they will flower better. I just said, okay, well, I think I'm just going to grow pagoda now. And
Yeah.
so, so I'm growing pagoda. For the first time last year, I got some bulbs and I absolutely adore it. And I know that our fellow ranter, Anne Wareham, and her husband, Charles Hawes, in Wales, they have that planted in their woodland. And they have over 30 years put more and more of that cultivar pagoda. It's a yellow, and it's fairly large, almost lettuce leafed,
A bigger, bolder.
much bigger. Because my erythronium,
Yeah.
the leaves are maybe a half inch width, but these are almost like lettuce leaves coming up. And they've got those in their woodlands, and then they die back, and their bluebells take over. Cool.
Oh, what a cool look. How about the anemone? There and listeners are various types of anemones, but this is the wood anemone. And let's just give Marianne a quiz about how she's going to pronounce this word because she's failed the quiz before.
We've established that I always
Anemone.
that I
Anemone.
add extra N's wherever I can
Where they
in my
shouldn't be.
pronunciation. But
Hmm.
thank you for humiliating me. I appreciate that, Leslie.
Sure, no problem. I can do that. Does anybody grow that one? It's a sweet little thing.
I don't grow an anemone.
I've grown it, anemone blanda.
The Blanda, yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It kind of goes where it wants to go. It's pretty reliable,
Yeah.
but never aggressive, not even close to aggressive. Last year I planted one, and this is one I forgot. I think it's a anemone correlata, I believe, and it is this much larger flower, a big blue flower that almost looked out of place. It was quite. It came up, and Michelle and I are just looking at this thing, going, "What is that?" Because it's not common. I hadn't seen many pictures of it before. It took a little while to figure it out, but it's a very bold, very unique flower. We'll see how it does in the long term. And then there's anemone sylvestris, which is like probably the woodland anemone that you're talking about. I've had that for years. I don't know if you can buy that from a bulb. I bought it from a plant, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's a bulb in there somewhere. But it's been a very reliable plant.
And that is also native to the United States if people are interested in that. And it can be a little thuggish, it can run, but the Blanda is what I was talking about, that sweet little bulb. And any place where you're shopping, listener, you'll get some good information depending on. Oh, let's talk about that for a minute. So I love color blends. They were my sponsor for a while on this podcast, but I love them because they're just, I don't know, easy to deal with, and you can buy multitudes. But Marianne, you love Brent and Becky's, and I got to go with you one time to meet Brent and Becky. And Brent made soup. It was kind of an awesome afternoon.
It was an awesome afternoon, and Pam Harper was there. Do you remember? And
Yeah. And Scott wasn't, so there's that.
no, and Scott wasn't. Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
lovely afternoon. Um, but I do love them, not because Brent gives me soup, but because I just love the vibe of that place. That Brent loves his bulbs. I mean, he loves them. I walked with him for about 3 hours. This is not on the same trip that I made with you, but he has these trial fields outside of their house and just in front of their house. And we walked along these trial fields, maybe, I don't know, 12, 13, I don't know, 20 rows, who knows, down and up. And he would be giving me the stories of each of these bulbs, different crosses that were named after different workers at Brent Becky's, or one that came from his father, or just all of these different stories. And he'd pick one and we'd put it in a bucket. And at the end of that, I brought that bucket home, and I mean, just absolutely filled with all of these different cultivars. And I loved the relationship that he had with these flowers and the way that they use them around the farm there. And I like the ethos there. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Brent Becky's. When I've had issues with them, like with an order, and it's very rare, but when I have had issues, they have solved them, and not because, oh, I'm friends with Brent, but well before that, when I order there, and oh goodness, this isn't, there was one where I didn't have the right canna. They took care of it. I didn't have issues going on. And sometimes things get mixed up. It's huge warehouses, but
Oh, yeah.
overall, I do like them.
Where do you buy yours, Scott?
Mostly Brett and Becky
Yeah.
for my home. The zoo, they put a bid out every year, and Color Blends won a couple times, but other companies have too. Netherlands is another one, and a few others I can't recall right now. But there's a handful of big suppliers, importing from Holland. Those are the big ones that have the daffodils
Yeah.
and the tulips. It's a little bit different than some of the others.
The Brent and Becky's ethos that you mentioned, Marianne, I just thought it was so cool that if at the end of the year they have some leftover bulbs, they give them to the people in the town. What is that, Gloucester, Virginia?
In Gloucester, Virginia.
Yeah. And the deal is, like, you good people of this town where we're doing our business, you can have these bulbs for free. But here's the only rule of this little game. You have to plant them in your front yard so we can all enjoy them. I just think that's so nice.
I thought that was very
I
Yeah.
cool
like
too.
that a
And
lot.
Color Blends is 100 years old as well. I mean, it's a old company as well. And John Sheepers, Van Engelen,
Hmm.
I get bulbs from them too.
Mhm.
And I also get bulbs usually end of August from Costco. I get Longfield Gardens bulbs. You can buy those online as well, but those are my bulb fodder. Those are my, I'm not caring too much. If I see something special, I'll grab it, but those are my Dutch masters. I want to add 200 Dutch masters to the lawns, or I want to add daffodils, or I want to add a bunch of Globemaster allium to a back bed. I do that as well, and then everything else supplements that because they're often very good bulbs. You do have to be careful. When I go to Home Depot or Lowe's and look at their little bags of bulbs that are on sale at the end of the season, if there's a bag of 5 or 10, you may not get 5 or 10 viable bulbs out of that.
Here's a really good reason why. So, um, I'm going to mention the word grandchild. Marianne, are you okay with this?
I'm okay if it's quick.
It's a gardening thing. My daughter took her daughter. That's my grandchild. And they went to the end of the season. Let's hit Home Depot and see what they have left for these bags of bulbs in this corner that nobody knows what's over there. And she's rifling through, and she's got a good supply, but she's like, what can we get on the cheap? Because this is how we roll, right? And she said, so Myrnie, that's my mother's name and also my granddaughter's name, is looking in another bag, and I'm really glad about that because the bag that I'm looking at, somebody's looking back up at me, and it's a mouse. So I said, "What did you
No
do?"
way.
She said, "I gave a little squeal and I ran away." And then that didn't deter me from looking at other bags, but I left that one to its own devices and it sort of rustled around. I hope nobody else had to go through that.
What you don't want are slimy bulbs and dry, crispy ones. You know, anything in between is probably fine, but yeah, if it's firm and basically treat it like an onion in your kitchen. If it's slimy and gross and it's got gnats all over it, no, you don't want it anymore. If it's dried up and husky, it's dead.
Somewhere in between. Hyacinths, anybody?
So hyacinths were used to predict the sex of the birth of my 2 children, and it worked. My son David, we were expecting my son. We were in London and we had a very small 2 window boxes. That was my garden, was playing with those window boxes. And so just for the hell of it, he was due in the summer. In the fall, we got some blue and some, what is the pink? Oh, pink. I hate pink. That's right. Pink,
Yeah, you can't even say it.
What the heck?
pink and blue hyacinths, planted them in, and we said, whichever comes first, that will be the sex of the baby. Forget this science technological BS. The hyacinths will tell us, and do you know they did? The blue came up. So 3 years later, we're back in America, and we had a little bit of space, and we thought, let's try this again, because it was obviously extremely scientific. And we put the
Mm.
hyacinths in, and do you know the pink ones came up?
Aw, for dear Emma.
My daughter Emma was born. So, I mean, this is incontrovertible evidence.
But there are many more reasons to grow hyacinth than to predict the sex of a baby. I think they're great. I think they're hard, like the big hyacinths, the big ones that you typically get are hard to work into a garden. So I like to put them in like their own little separate space, treat them basically like a cutting garden plant.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the fragrance is so unbelievably amazing that yeah, it's something you want to bring inside as much as you can. So that's how I treat those. I will say this: if you're planting hyacinths, cover up. There's something in that skin that causes severe itching with a lot of people.
I was not tracking that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're planting them and you're one of those people, your eyelids, your arms, anywhere that you have soft skin will just be itchy as you've ever experienced. It can be maddening. It drives me
Oh,
insane. So I have to, yeah, basically long sleeves, cover my face even as much as I can, gloves, obviously.
yeah, bad. Ooh. Another design tip for those because they're so big and blousy and they will flop over. They're very heavy. So you've got this big bulb, no matter where you put it, and I think putting it in its own little separate cutting area is a good idea. Even if you want to incorporate it into the landscape, that first spring, it's going to be big and ridiculous and flop. cut it, bring it inside. And maybe the next year or the year after, it's actually going to be something that's a little bit more spare and a little bit more, well, willing to stand erect because it's not so damn big. And it could look better in your border.
I found that to be true.
Are we on board with the idea of putting these actually into the garden? Because I am so not on board with that. I could handle window boxes and I can handle pots indoors.
Okay.
They're so big, and even if they're smaller, they're still just sort of their flower is so, I hate to use the word vulgar.
No, you don't.
This is the only thing I can think of.
No, you don't. It's totally you to use the word vulgar.
There is nothing delicate about them. They
Oh,
are in your face, smell me.
no, they're
They're
coarse.
coarse. There we go. They're a little bit coarse, and I have really come away from using them in the garden itself.
But you've got those vegetable beds that are just begging for a corner of
But for
hyacinth to
why
be
though?
put in
I mean, if they're
And
indoors,
then
but
you
if they're
cut them
to
indoors,
bring
and
it
put
inside.
them next to your bed, and you wake up in a good mood. I tell you.
oh no, my gosh, that'll drive most people
It's,
out of a house. Come on, the smelliness of a hyacinth.
I think it's really good. Scott thinks
You
it's really
see,
good.
even
2 on 1.
garden people listeners can have very serious differences.
Well, what kind of smell do you want in your house?
Harvey's Bristol cream, for one.
I think hyacinths are good. Talk about in your face, alliums.
Okay, I am team allium. I want to take off from here. Okay, because if you're not growing alliums,
uh,
you...
this is where I want to back out.
oh,
Oh no, why?
And talk about like disrupting a bed is having like what is it, a 6-inch ball of flour, like in the middle of everything. It's like
what are you
in the early
growing,
spring.
Scott? I mean, a Shabertii maybe?
I don't know what they are. Maybe I exaggerated, but I love the lesser alliums, the ones that aren't.
The moly or whatever the little.
Millennium.
Oh, well, those are herbaceous.
I like those. But what is the big one that everybody gets in spring? That
Yeah, Globemaster,
Love
Gladiator.
Master. It's just too much.
I think that allium are extremely good in design for creating continuity in beds. Because if you've got a big mess of lots of different things, maybe onesies because you have no money, or onesies because you have too much money and you're buying rare plants, so there's one of each, you can create real continuity in your bed by having allium naturalistically planted, not like soldiers, but 4 here and then 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 1, and it sort of draws the eye down the bed and creates this, I don't know, it makes it more cohesive. I get that they can be overdone because most things that are cool end up being overdone, but I think that they are so versatile, and they don't all have to be that massive globe master, or what is it? It's not globe master, gladiator. Christophii and Schubertii, those are, I mean, they're works of art. And actually, while we speak, I have Schubertii and Christophii hanging in my dining room as part of what was last year's Christmas display, which turned into a naturalistic display, which is going to be part of this year's Christmas display.
Probably needs dusting.
Don't they look like disco balls? Don't you want to get out the like silver spray paint?
I have never wanted to do that. No. A lot of people paint them in
Oh,
the garden when they dry. They paint them. I
yeah.
prefer to cut them. I might leave a few in the garden dried, but I'll cut them and keep them to use indoors. And one of my new favorites, which
How
is
would they taste on a burger?
really,
Do you hear that?
go for a yellow onion. Don't even go Vidalia, because obviously your palate is so coarse. Just go yellow onion. One of my new favorites is White Giant, which is a stipitatum, and it's expensive. I was given some a few years ago, and they are beautiful. But this is a tall, maybe 4 feet, with a, I would say, 5 to 6 inch ball, white, very strong. And I started some from cedar. I'm sure they won't be White Giant. There'll be some cultivar of stipitatum, but yeah. Oh, I love allium. But, here's the big but with allium. is they will smother stuff around them, like we talked about earlier. And you have to be very careful that you're putting them with strong perennials in beds that can handle that smothering, that they're just going to push their way up through that, or you're giving them some room.
They are 100% deer proof.
Yep, that's an onion.
I ran over one with it was probably Millennium or one of those perennial types the other day with my mower, and my yard smelled like onions for a week. And it really dictated my menu choices for that whole time.
Burgers were
Like,
strong for you that week?
yeah.
I haven't had deer eat them, but I have had voles nibble at them, and I've seen the nibble marks. And
Really?
Oh,
if you've never grown Allium schubertii, and I'm sure you both have, this is like a meteor explosion. It's a work of art, and it's worth doing at least once.
it's a disco
No,
ball.
it's not a disco ball because a disco ball is very much everything's at the same plane. But schubertii has some of the long, what would they be? Stamens going out? I don't even know what they would be. It's a cluster of flowers,
Payments, yeah, I think.
and some of them are close in. It looks like a meteor. It's absolutely gorgeous, or a starburst or a firework. But I've had them just sort of disappear in my garden. That could be the soil, it could be voles, I don't know. But I have seen vole marks on them.
They particularly, as most bulbs, they don't like a lot of moisture in the summer. And so I was so lucky with a border that I had up in Connecticut where I was very penurious watching my gardening budget. And I think I know I bought 3 allium bulbs and maybe they were Globemaster. I don't know what it was. This was 20 years ago. And I planted 3. And I was thrilled, beyond thrilled that the next year I got 9 flowers. So clearly, I had no
Huh.
irrigation system and I wasn't attending those borders. But in Virginia, where there's clay soil, that is not happening. And they're actually they kind of peter out, right? For you guys, what happens?
Some of them really come back and come back. Allium stipitatum, the Mount Everest, has come back and gotten bigger and bigger, and I take little divisions from it and move it around. But Gladiator and Purple Sensation, those have disappeared slowly in my garden, have to be replanted, like Schubertii and Christophii. So, Scott?
I haven't really done those plants myself over any period of time, but I will say, just driving around town, you don't see like those obviously old plantings of them around. So I think they do tend to kind of wither.
So the Allium stipitatum is the white giant, but another cultivar is the Mount Everest. Is that right, Marianne?
I'm pretty sure when I went to look into it, Mount Everest, which was one that it took me by surprise because I bought it when I bought Gladiator, and I found that every year, year after year, Mount Everest coming back and coming back hard and making very large clumps that I had to dig and divide. But Gladiator nowhere to be found. And when I looked into it, Gladiator was Allium stipitatum, which also happened to be the white giant, which was just so exciting. Now, you were talking about taking advantage of the work that's been done for you by the bulb suppliers, and that was absolutely true for white giant because I grew it that first year. It was extraordinarily beautiful. I cut them and I put them in a vase in my dining room. And then the next year they came back and I cut them again and put them in a vase, in the same vase in my dining room. Yes, some dusting needs to be done. I get it. But they are definitely lessened. The second year flowers are they're still there, but they're smaller. They're not as big
Oh,
because they weren't grown in probably 12 to 14 hours of sunshine. Yeah, and fertilized and all of that. So yeah, it's interesting. These are the sort of things that you figure out. Also, you need to dust or change your decor. You know, what to do.
Dusting is good.
What else with bulbs, Scott? There was something that it came to my mind. Oh, it was something I wanted to interject earlier, which was the fact that they at Dixter they dig those bulbs, daffodils and tulips, and they store them all in a dry area, and then they sort through them in the fall and pull the
huh.
ones that are big enough to actually flower, and throw the others away. And that's because they have a lot of minions working
Mm.
on that. Most of us aren't doing that too much, but that made me a lot braver to take out daffodils where I didn't want them. even if I didn't know where they were going to go.
So we've talked a lot about different types of bulbs. Now let's talk about going back a little bit to design, but a little bit to actual culture. Scott, you had something that you wanted to say about something that's happening with daffodils and dividing daffodils, and when do you do that? In your front border?
Yeah, so I've got this old planting that's a mishmash and it needs correcting. There's different cultivars in it. It basically just it's a mess. And I really have wanted for a long time to go in and pull out some of the colors. And they all need dividing now too. They've been in the ground a long time. And it's always the time thing. But also I know it's not the ideal time by the rule book to divide or move daffodils. So I've always thought, yeah, well, maybe I can mark them somehow and go back in the fall. And you just know that's never going to happen. Even if you mark them, the marker is going to get lost or whatever.
Hmm.
So, I've just resolved myself that, next year, next spring, when they're done blooming, and I know right, or even as they are blooming, and I can tell what is what colors are where, and which clumps need dividing, that, what, that is when I'm going to go in, dig them up, divide, do whatever I need to do, move them, and they'll take a hit. Actually, the ones that need division are probably going to flourish by the process. But it's really the only way to do it. These things are so resilient that it's going to work. And even if it doesn't, at least it's solved a mess, right?
Yeah, you don't want a dog's breakfast in your front border.
Yeah.
But I would say that it's a little bit daunting to sort of ruin your spring garden by sticking a shovel in there. But just like with galanthus, snowdrops, digging them up in the green. So, listener, that means that the foliage is still there. You know exactly what you have. And these plants can really profit by division. If you have daffodils coming up blind, it's usually for one of three reasons. One, they're too crowded, easy to fix. Get the shovel out in spring. A little bit hard, but you can do it. The second reason is that they might be in too much shade, and the third reason is that they might be too moist, that in which case you might want to try to save the bulb and get it to drier territory. Blind means, oh, look at this beautiful daffodil foliage, but where are my flowers? I am very sad there are no flowers. There are things that you could do besides shopping to remediate that.
Yeah, and make sure if you are going to immediately replant, especially with snowdrops, don't let them dry out. One of the sort of Galanthus gurus, remember the Galanthus Gala is in March, I think, in Philadelphia next year.
We're all going, right?
I'm going.
No, I've never been invited. I
You
can't
don't
afford it.
get invited. You buy a ticket.
You were just trying to make it so he wouldn't come.
One of the guys there that has been doing this for so long says, "Do you water your snowdrops when you plant them?" And I thought, "No, I don't." And he says, "You should be. You give them a little bit of water when you plant them again." And so that's a really good idea. And going way back to when you were talking, Scott, about putting leaves and sticks in the hole when you're and I know so many of our listeners are going to go, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that I do that because I do
Where
that."
is
You're
the
trying
soil? Where did it go?
pieces of
Yeah.
grass. So just having a small bucket with compost or soil in it that you're taking around with you, bucket of soil, bucket of
Yeah.
bulbs, and it's a bit, kludgy, but just bring it with you and then you can just scoop some soil into that hole. Or you can use that wonderful tool that they had at Dixter, and I think it was a sneeboard tool, which you just sort of jam into the earth, pull back. You're standing upright, and you jam it into the earth, and you pull it out, and it pops that plug out. Bulb goes in, and then you come back, and
Little
you just
plug.
put that plug right back in.
It sounds like the mechanism the greenskeeper used to make the hole on the green,
It actually it probably
right?
looks a lot like
Oh yeah.
that. It's the key is doing it not going straight up and down, but going at a sort of an angle and then pulling it back.
Oh,
It pops that little plug out, and then you can put that plug back in. But if you don't have that kind of tool or you don't have that kind of energy, then just having a bucket of soil with you is a great idea.
one other thing with the mechanics of actually planting bulbs, if you have a pal with you and you have just a sturdy shovel, so you're going for a big hole, it's not one at a time like my 1986 planting, to just dig put your boot into the back of that shovel, flip up the soil, keep it inverted. So hold it, and maybe you're flexible enough to grab a handful of your bulbs to just shove it in there, or maybe a friend is doing that for you. So literally, the piece of land that your shovel uh, separated from its other land is now flopped back down over.
You're so articulate.
I know. Well, it's hard on a
Displaced.
podcast, right? Where's Instagram when you need it? This place. And I mean, it's a little bit overrated to like arrange the bulbs so that the roots are down and the tips are up. I think they'll find their way, right?
They will. Yeah, it's ideal, of course, to plant them right side up. But the thing I've always heard too is if in doubt, plant them on their side. Yeah, they'll figure it out.
Yeah, and you can also,
They'll
if you're
figure it
using
out.
like a hori or some sort of very sharp trowel, you can do that same sort of thing, just plunging into the ground, pulling back slightly, especially for the little bulbs like crocus
Yeah.
or scilla or what have you. And
Yes.
then one last plug, even though we are not being paid to say this, I do want to talk about power planter and the idea of putting an auger on the end of a drill, which if you are working in an area that doesn't have
Mhm.
other plants and other roots to worry about, is one of the easiest ways to make your life so much better when you're planting a lot of bulbs. It's an auger that goes on the end of is it a 3.5 inch? What is it? It's like a 3.5 inch and a 2 inch auger, handheld. They have larger ones too that
Yeah.
you can just sort of drill with a larger drill.
Battery powered drills are so good now that you don't even have to take gasoline or electric cord. You can use those drills just to do it. It will power through, certain things. You want to be strong, you want to be braced. If you hit a root, it can throw your arm into the neighbor's yard. Um,
That's ugly.
No, there's a torque issue. That's
the
true.
other thing is that is definitely where you want to be walking around with a pail of compost or soil to backfill with, because that you just will not find enough soil from wherever you need to from after using that tool.
When I ran my crew, I had that all set up, and so that means two gardeners and very, very clear communication skills between them. Like I'm digging here, and you're poking there, and of course we would add pepper because we were afraid of critters. You can add what's the kind of pepper?
Cayenne.
Cayenne pepper you could buy in bulk that you could throw into that hole or throw over top. That's something that can help you with critters. And so the person on their hands and knees would place the bulb, put the pepper, replace whatever soil they could find, and move on. But they always had to keep a certain respectable distance from the person with the auger because that's their hands that are nearby. So it's much easier and faster with two people, and you should be respectful of the auger.
Very
Yeah.
respectful. You have a firm grip, but you also have a little bit of slack so that if it catches, you're not holding it that it's going to break your wrist.
Your arm doesn't go in the neighbor's yard, as Scott so succinctly
Yeah,
put it.
no, you really do. You have to, and that's if you hit a root.
Or a rock, yeah.
And the places you don't want to use this in garden beds that are filled with bulbs that you've already planted that you're going to break up, the roots that you might hit. This is really for more wild naturalistic places, young gardens where you don't have much in the way of bulbs in the ground. Whenever I hit a bulb that I've already planted with one of these or just with my trowel, I always think, well, as long as I cut that basal plate, little bit of that basal plate of the bulb off, I just got another bulb. Or maybe several. If you wound that plate on the bottom of the bulb, it often sprouts again. That's how you make new bulbs. As long as fungus and disease doesn't get into it, it might be just a good thing in the long run.
Scott, what about the thing where you had that border and you planted those beautiful bulbs 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago, and you're like, and they are petering out, and I want to add more, and we're going to have collateral damage or clashing of colors. How do you handle that?
I don't know. I don't know. Honestly, I don't.
Well, I do. I never ask a question that I don't know the answer to, so I do.
Leslie, how would you solve this problem?
So tell me.
Here's how I would solve that problem. So you see this planting that you did several years ago is petering out. You're like, okay, we're starting again here. And if you remember what you bought, which is
That's
great.
my problem. I never remember
I
anything.
never know.
Yeah.
But I think they were pink. I don't know. They're usually pink, whatever. You could just buy more of those and do what you can. But if you really want to change your color scheme and if you're afraid of a clash, don't be afraid of the clash. Clashes in the garden are sometimes wonderful. They catch your eye, they make you stop. You're like, whoa, I never expected that to happen. And bottom line is, if it's so bad that it's really offensive to your eye, you just cut the darn thing that's making you crazy and bring it inside and put it by your bedside. So I'm all for starting again and not worrying about what was in there. If some of them survive and come up,
Yeah.
thank them for playing your game. And if they're driving you crazy, cut them and bring them inside. Scott, that was the correct answer to the question. I'm sorry that you failed.
Leslie, I'm sorry I brought him on. I'm
But I
sorry.
agree with everything you said. So
Oh, now who's the pretentious bitch? Okay.
Whoa!
Oh,
I've got this.
whoa.
whoa,
Wow, I'm sorry. That's two Harvey's Bristol creams in me. I don't know what to
I
you guys
say.
say things
Sorry.
I cannot say.
My 20-ounce wine is sort of, oh, we're down to 3 ounces here. We got to wrap it up.
This is why everybody's getting testy.
I think that we have hit everything. And the one thing I want to say is think of bulbs as one of the many layers in your garden. It is a layer. Don't think of them as the be all end all. Just think of them as a layer. And once you start thinking of them that way, it becomes fun. In some areas, they may be the whole deal.
Like at the Cincinnati Botanical Zoo and whatever it is going on up there. That's the whole deal, right, Scott?
Wait, what?
It is, but that's the point of the display.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it is for that short time. It is for the month of April. Well, no, it's not even that, because right along with all those tulips blooming are the viburnums and the cherries. So it definitely, even in a display of 100,000, is only a piece of the whole picture.
Wow.
Yeah, but it's stunning, believe me. I mean, I used to be a little bit callous about tulips before working at the zoo, and it was just like, they're great, but when you see that many of them all together on a beautiful April evening with their backlit by the sunlight.
One more thing on top of my other one more thing that I think that is a great design thought. Don't forget to pair those bulbs as a layer with your emerging perennial foliage that's starting to come up. Your fennels, your aqualegias, columbine. I'm trying to think of some verbascums coming up. That pairing makes more, what is the whole is the greater than the sum of its parts. You don't just have bulbs, you have this beautiful frothy, sometimes
The contrast of
of
textures.
textures that's sort of the background to these bulbs. Start thinking in terms of those pairings. It's very hard to stop a fennel from coming up, but boy, can you make it shine with some casada daffodils or, something else fabulous.
So it's like a tapestry. It's like a garden mixer. It's a
It's like
garden
a
mixer.
it's like a
Wow,
garden mixer. This name is turning out
Oh,
you
so
guys are
much
good.
better than I ever
I
imagined
know. I
for it.
know.
Yeah.
And we mixed it up with Scott Beuerlein for the last 2 episodes. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you for that. I appreciate being here.
I wonder if any other guest will be brave enough to
Yeah.
follow in your footsteps.
Between those two shovels, right?
Well, if they're not, I'm always willing to come on. That's
Yay.
right.
All right, we'll be back in a couple of weeks and we'll talk about, I don't know what we're going to talk about.
Oh, we're going to talk about the winter garden.
Oh, wait, really? Wait, can't we talk about Christmas first? I don't
Well, you
know.
guys are fighting. I'll actually take the next episode on, and we'll talk about football.
Winter garden, winter garden, winter garden. Bye bye,
All
guys.
right. Bye, Scott. Bye, Marianne.